Okay, welcome once again to another episode. We are going to talk a little bit about this one. It feels like it's become so relevant for so many people. And we're going to talk a little bit about how much information is out there and how much is coming out of the woodwork on a daily right now. Not just with the, what you would call it, the spiritual world, the woo-woo shit, all the different aspects, all the different topics. And the internet, of course, has already blown this up to a certain extent. But I feel as though in the last year, particularly, more and more and more and more people are starting to come out with all their own perceptions, all their own information, all their own understandings for themselves, and delivering this to hopefully help others, which is understandable. But also, I'm finding a lot of people are unsure of like who or what to trust these days as well, because of course, as we all know, as any genre of business or anything else out there, you will always have the people that might be trying to scam or get greedy or all the things. But hopefully we can talk a bit more about how it's actually becoming easier for many to start finding the authenticity in others and knowing, who feels more in line with wanting to help rather than the ones that are just out to, grab money or do this or that or set you in a path that maybe you don't understand or don't want to be a part of. So
Yeah, well, and I mean, there's even the fact of that people are speaking their truth or a truth that maybe it's just not who or where you are right now, or maybe you never will be. Maybe that's not your path on the planet at this time, right? So just, yeah, learning how to navigate and know like what resonates for me where I am now, that's going to help me step into my next layer of truth, my next layer of expansion, and then leaving room for others to do the same and letting it be okay that that's not the same for everyone. But it's more like the authenticity of, is it heading in the general direction of the larger truth, right? Like, because that's still a spectrum that we're all going to be in a little bit different spot in that realm.
yeah, there's so much information. It can be so overwhelming in a sense. Especially if you're excited and you're like, man, I want to learn more about this or that. And I mean, it can be very exciting, but yet you get into it and you're like, wow, like I just consumed so much information. And because we're human, a lot of our time, the brain is going to want to make sense of absolutely everything you just watched or took in. And so in which we'll pull it through the belief system that you already have, right? It's going to try and filter, it's going to try and test to say, well, I don't know, is that our truth? I don't know if that's true at all. And then if you are already, you call yourself an overthinker, this can cause a lot of, in a way, stress to some extent because you think too hard almost on all of the stuff you just were given or consumed. And then that causes confusion. And of course, nobody really likes to feel confused, but it does come from a state of overanalytic mind of trying to make sense of everything as well. I do find some people that will take in some of this more in depth on especially some of the galactic stuff or maybe some other things that maybe are not so earthly based, and the brain all of a sudden is like, oh my goodness, now we have to make sense of all of this. Like, how are we supposed to put this in a vision when we're here as a 3D human being in this moment? It's impossible to do. And I do recommend, don't try. You will drive yourself to a point where you will never, for one, you'll never have enough information after the fact because you'll always be looking for more to try and subsidize and bring it into a physical sense. And also, you will start to almost feel more lost in the sense of like trying to find your own truth because now you're trying to consume everything. And yet you must remember, you are already a big part of the universe in an energetic body. You know everything already from a higher self perspective. That's not what you're here to do as human. You're not here to integrate all of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways to understand that is like you will have seeds of knowing or seeds of remembrance that are planted, but the seed doesn't just automatically grow, right? It has to just be there in that dark space in the soil and it has to go through its process. So when we receive these bits of knowledge or these seeds of information and we're immediately trying to bring it forward to make sense of it and apply it and integrate it, it's like, remember the seed of the tree. Like, that's just not how it works. It's a frequency, it's information, It's frequency in the form of information that's been planted within your field. And not every seed grows, right? Not every seed sprouts, and then some of them do. And so if like letting it be that way, and I feel like that's a lot of, it takes some of the pressure off figuring out and just trusting that your higher self, your being, your soul is going to allow the seeds of truth to grow, and any mis or disinformation seeds will not, and sometimes maybe there'll be some weeds, but you'll know, and you'll pick them out, and it's all okay. It's just part of the process.
And the weeds I find often will come from our own limiting beliefs of some kind that have either twisted that in a way that feels impossible for ourselves. I find that's also another really big one, or seems really far off. It's like, when you talk about your dreams, if you talk about them like being these far off things, you're already believing in a sense of yourself that it's like kind of impossible to reach that. And so some of this information might feel like that, right? Some people might be talking, or how we have even spoken. I mean, I know we've had some galactic episodes that I get so excited about because I love that space, but that is my truth. That's what resonates for me as a being. That might not resonate with everybody else, and that's okay. But at the same time, being okay with other people talking about things that maybe don't resonate for you as well. We are not all supposed to be in the same box for good reason, but we are supposed to be able to share our own truths for others to be able to find what resonates as their own truth. So by picking and choosing the seeds instead of, like you said, trying to force them to grow right away, sometimes they were meant to be planted in that moment for the beliefs that were relevant at that point in time. And then all of a sudden, maybe you have this shift and some belief kind of gets switched around where it's serving you more. And all of a sudden that seed that, was planted is now starting to grow because it needed that frequency of that belief to actually make it grow.
Exactly.
It is a process, though. It is something that people, being humans, we all want to have answers right away, too, right? And so trying to learn the flow, which this is why I think Zahara uses the ocean waves so often, because it's that flow and the ebb and flow up on the beach. That's how frequencies and energy moves. And yet, that is something where our brains have a hard time accepting. And I think it also partially comes from the survival mode of being human, and knowing, hey, we need to always know our next step to be able to survive. And so that's a belief many of us have to kind of work through and start trusting in something else, which often you can't see, the unknown or faith or whatever you want to call it. But you also have to start learning how to trust yourself. So the best way to do that is taking what resonates for yourself, learning what feels true for me, what feels like, oh, that just struck me. I feel like that definitely, or gave you the goosebumps. I find goosebumps is always like a really good sign. Um, if you're kind of not so sure, or you're like kind of second guessing yourself in that moment, all of a sudden you get goosebumps. Goosebumps is often a really good sign to say that's resonating with yourself.
Yeah, and so it can also be called lightning in the blood, or etheric chills, or people get like an electric shock.
I
There's
have
lots.
never heard it described that way, but I love that.
Yeah. Um, so, your body knows the truth, and yeah, there will be these indicators, and I had more I wanted to say, but it's gone.
Probably because I got too excited about you describing goosebumps.
Yes,
I don't
that was
remember
totally
it.
what happened.
My bad.
Um, man, maybe it'll come back though at some point.
It probably will. Yeah, and like that's the other part of it too, is I mean, you have to remember your body in a sense has its own type of consciousness that's directly connected to your higher self, your soul, whatever you want to call it. So your conscious mind is just the middleman. He's just trying to make sense of what's being said through the frequencies and then what the body is giving off, but it also filters all of that through our own beliefs of the subconscious mind. They just showed me something extremely cool. So you know how a lot of filters are set up with like the different layers, you might have sand or coal or whatever it is that the water is going to filter through. That is exactly how the brain or the conscious mind filters through the energy and the frequencies. So between, and it goes both ways, you know, body and higher self, direct information are coming through the physical body. But the sand or the coal or all that is the beliefs that exist within all of us. So depending on what color or how much is being filtered through is going to depend on what kind of belief that is, right? So again, the conscious mind is just there to try and help have our human experience and our physical reality match to whatever is in existence between that filter in the actual sense between higher self and body.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways that we can try and figure that out, but I would say don't think too hard about it.
Right, exactly. And this is what I was gonna say is like, so when you get information and these like the cool, wild galactic knowledge or information, or you have this really magical experience, it's like, okay, great. Is this relevant for me now? Right? Is this, how does this apply to who I am now, my life now? How do I integrate or embody this, you know? And that can help you, like, if you don't have those answers, then it's probably a seed and don't worry about it, right? Like, how, yeah, like all the knowledge out there in the world, again, like we said, like you already have that at a soul level. It's like, what's the information that's relevant for me now in my human walk on this planet? Right? Like,
Exactly. And trying to remember, what do you want to experience in this human life? Because that's also extremely important for the fact of what seeds are going to be relevant for you to be able to actually have those experiences here. And so there's a lot of time, like, for example, when I started on this journey, I understood that, you know, I was a psychic medium. It was very natural for me to do all these things. That was part of my magic that as a child I used to read in books, right? Because that was the only place I felt like I could access it. It was something that I always loved, but from our physical reality, I was always told this is all that there is. This is it. You know, there's don't your imagination is one thing, but it was always said to me in a way that it wasn't real. Right.
yeah,
And so for me, I was able to get that from my books from a child. And then as I came into this notion of understanding more of myself and who I actually am on that soul level, finding what actually resonated for me. But because of what we do, I think part of us will dive, as many that may be listening as well. If you are extremely fascinated by this kind of thing, I guarantee there's probably something there for you for sure in your path or your purpose or whatever it is you want to call it. But not to get too lost into the rabbit holes that are not necessarily drawing you in or interesting to you. And yet you might look at it all and be like, oh my God, it's all interesting though. But there will be more pulls towards certain things for you that I would say go with that. That's part of what, you know, we're trying to say. There will be signs and things that your body is going to say, hey, I like that one a little bit more. We feel like there's more something there for us that is either more intriguing or fascinating. And sometimes, like you said, it might just be an experience where you have, maybe you go into meditation, finally hit that point where you're like blasted out in your full energetic body, and you have this crazy cool experience. You're not always meant to come back and try and make sense of every piece of that. Often that is a seed being planted. And then, as we have mentioned, when something shifts, it starts to grow and all of a sudden it clicks, right? That's where a lot of people say, oh, there's my light bulb moment or my aha moment. I fucking get it finally, right? It's because they didn't allow themselves to continually overanalyze it and allowed your garden to grow, you know, and to water it. So by watering, just meaning being self-aware, right? Paying attention to what's going on. What are you consuming that feels good? And what are you consuming that doesn't feel so good anymore? Because
yeah,
you also start to notice that even in life. Like we were just talking about the other day about the whole like TV shows or movies and how I was very fond of a very particular type of genre of movie that I now will not actually watch anymore because it just doesn't resonate with me any longer.
yeah,
Different frequencies, different ways, as you want to call it, leveling up or whatever you want to call it. I don't really like that term though, to be honest with you, because I don't feel like it's a ladder. As we all know, radio waves sit on all different places, and that's exactly what this is, because it's all just frequency. It's just a preferred state of being rather than an unpreferred or a lower frequency that you're choosing to get out of, right? So I don't really like the word leveling up. And it's just in a sense of choosing something different for yourself that feels better. And for me, watching those movies doesn't feel good anymore. So I don't watch the movies anymore like that, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. I was just remembering the other thing we were going to bring into this episode. where we were discussing, and I'm just not sure how to tie it in exactly,
We'll just pause.
but we were discussing how we there are these, so many people are having these multidimensional experiences, and we were talking about our clair abilities. And like oftentimes when my children will say, "Oh, I told you this thing, mom," and I'm like, not in this timeline, not in this reality, right? Because I have an awareness that like so much more exists, right? Like, and it's all real. So, when we're thinking about when you're having these experiences, it's relevant to this, like all the information out there and available, all of these humans. It's like maybe somewhere they did tell me the information, right? And my higher self just didn't translate it over into this human Dana. But it's, it all of these things are just so relevant to what's going on and what's happening. And so just giving yourself grace, whether we're talking about um, you know, the knowledge coming in and the seeds being planted and not having to figure that out, or we're talking about an exchange you have with another human being that they're certain it's one way and you're certain it's another way, like maybe just allow it to be and not try and figure it out. Like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Or, as a mother, I often just give them grace for the most part, right? And just be like, okay, I got it now. Thanks. And leave it at that. And that's kind of the same way with all the information that comes in, just allowing it to be there. And then like, okay, now it's time. Now it's relevant. Now it's applicable. How can I apply this in a way that feels good for me and my truth and highest good?
And the other piece is like, you don't have to figure all that out yourself.
Mhm.
This is why we say conscious mind is being guided by not just your higher self, but your teams that are here working with you, because you don't have to sit there and try and figure out when it's relevant and when it's not. If you trust in your higher self or your teams or whatever, if you've got a loved one on the other side that you prefer, it makes you feel better to connect with that kind of person because they were here with you in the physical. That's totally fine too. But to trust in the fact that they will always, if you ask, bring you forth the relevant pieces in those moments. So you're not trying to shift through all the different pieces that you may be feeling, because what has also happened ever since the solar eclipse, the energy is being split in other ways that it never has been necessarily on Earth in many of our conscious times. So with that as well, it's becoming more relevant about, like you just described, that it could be said or in another timeline almost, but that's not exactly where we are in the physical reality, but it was actually said and done in another point in time. And so for many people are starting to understand, not understand, I'm going to take back that word because a lot of people don't understand how time works, but and it's hard to grasp as human because we've only ever known it in this linear direction. But what is happening is people are starting to experience how time's actually working. So you might have these moments where you're like, man, am I going insane? Like, I'm pretty fucking sure I had that conversation, And yet they're telling me I didn't. And so you must remember too, everybody has their own perspective and their own perceptions of their own reality. No two realities are ever the same because none of us can see it the same way. We all have different setups, literally. So to have that grace and the compassion of understanding, it's likely not just you having these moments. You're not going crazy, we promise. It's just the fact that we have to be more okay with allowing this change to take place, even as human, because it is changing whether we like it or not. But if you want to resist it, you're probably going to drive yourself a little mad or create some kind of pain and suffering for yourself within that. And yet I find so many are seeking just that much more knowledge to make sense of it, and now they're confusing themselves because there is so much out there. So again, even if you're trying to figure out like, man, time's been super squishy. And what I mean by that is like sometimes you might be doing something, you look at the clock, you're like, shit, it's only been like 10 minutes. How's it only been 10 minutes? I'm pretty sure it's been at least a half an hour. And then there'll be other times where you look at the clock, you're like, how the hell is this day already over? I don't even feel like, I blinked and it's all gone already, and it's those moments. And I mean, yes, that's always existed as humans, but I find more and more people are talking about how time feels so strange or it's getting squishier. And it is getting squishier because as we raise in by frequency, time and everything starts to come in collaboration with the galactics in a different way as well. So For all my people that love the science stuff, go look up some, black holes, time warping, all those things. It'll start to make more sense to you.
Yeah, I can't believe it's July. What the heck, man?
Yeah, and not only just July, it's already a week into July. It's already July 8th today. So, 6 months has already gone by. This is our 21st episode now. It's incredible. But at the same time, you will never find Dayna and I worrying about time in the certain ways that a lot of people will, because it does not control us. And in a real sense, if you believe in yourself hard enough, actually, if you go out, look up, I believe it's Albert Einstein talked a bit about time as well, and if you can actually control it to a certain extent. So there you go. We'll leave you with that. If you're going to go look into time, go look up Albert Einstein and go look what he actually had brought forth. And I say his name for the fact that he brought this forth so long ago, and it was relevant even back then, but it's even more so now because our energies are changing so much on Earth that people, whether you want to believe it or not, is fine. We're not telling you have to, but you will start to notice time being squishier or weirder almost in a sense. And it's not just because we're all getting older. Everybody can say time flies when you get old. No, it's changing even for people like my dad, who's a very black and white man, who would have never said anything like that. But he says, time's just been kind of strange lately. Even for him to say something like that, and he does not analyze stuff in this direction like a lot of people would. So it just goes to show you there's a lot going on. And this is the time to start trusting yourself, figuring out your own truth, and literally fuck the rest of the information. You don't have to throw it on the dirt and say it's wrong. Just taking what resonates for yourself and moving forward with that will also make you feel more whole and in control in certain directions, because now you feel like you've got your feet back on the ground.
Mhm.
That was a lot I just said.
Leave it at that.
I was like, I feel like that was like mic drop. We're done. So again, we're going to remind you, we've got an amazing community. If you'd like to join us in the community, please do so. There's a link in the description, and not just of our podcast, but every episode has a link. So please come and join us if you wish. We gather lots in there. We love to over deliver. We're constantly looking at expanding and growing in whatever our community is asking for and needing. So if you've got questions and you're looking for information and you like what we've been saying, come join our community and ask your questions, get some information. We've got some pretty great people that are more than willing to hold space and create a really awesome place to have no judgment and allow people to learn in whatever aspect they are looking to learn in. So we hope to see you either there or on our next episode.